Can different sole plates affect how comfortable your football boots are? Now, you may think the only reason the sole plates are there on your boots is to give you more traction on the pitch, but they are also going to affect how your boots fit. And I find some of the discourse around sole plates to be a little bit interesting because a lot of brands and some players seem to think that the stiffer the sole plate, the better. But ultimately, I don't think that that's true. Now, obviously, you can have a sole plate that's too soft because that would just result in stud pressure because almost any pair of boots is going to have relatively long conical or bladed studs, and if the sole plate was too soft, you would just end up feeling the pressure from those studs coming through the insole. But you also have to remember that your foot is not a rigid structure. Your feet have so many smaller bones and muscles, and they're capable of flexing in a variety of directions. And for that reason, you don't actually want a sole plate that is completely rigid and incapable of flexion. And that's why, in my experience, when I've used boots that have a really rigid sole plate, they can actually cause some fatigue in my feet over time. In fact, when I look at one of my favorite pairs of boots of the year, this is the Adler Horenzo, you can see just how much I can bend it without really even applying that much force. The sole plate is relatively capable of both flexion and torsion. But then when I compare it to something like the Vapor 16 Pro from Nike that I have here, it's going to be much harder to bend. I'm only able to get just a little bit of flexion towards the toe box. Now, I should note that as you get a new pair of boots and you break them in over a few weeks and months, the sole plate will get a little bit more flexible. And generally, the bare minimum that you're going to want to look for in terms of sole plate flexion is that they bend just behind the toe box, which is pretty much right here around this area, because that's where your feet are going to be bending when you're running. And to show you an example of poor sole plate design, this is a pair of Umbros that I have here, and literally if I grab the boots from the top and the bottom and pull them apart, it's almost only the heel area that seems to move back and forth, whereas conversely, the forefoot and the toe box is extremely rigid. So ultimately, this design here just isn't very anatomical, and it's not going to do a good job of moving well with your feet. So as far as sole plates go, make sure when you try on your boots, they don't feel too constraining as you're walking around, but make sure you also don't feel any stud pressure coming through the bottom of the insoles.